myself.
Okay, well, thank you all very much. It's about a minute or so, I think, before 7 o'clock, but we'll go ahead and start. I hope you've had a chance to read chapter 6, 7, and 8. Uh, as I've read through this, I tell you what, some of these texts are just going to drive you crazy. So I'm so glad you can't throw anything, because when we get to chapter 7, people are going to start throwing stuff. But again, remember, you got to remember that this is a particular kind of literature. It's a sarcasm. It's a purposeful look at this world if there is no God, and what a mess it is, and what a hopelessness it is. I mean, and this book is trying to point that up. Now, I think in its day, it was not trying to do that. I think in its day, this author was reacting against traditional Jewish theology. Now, it's often called the two ways. And you can see it in Leviticus 26, Deuteronomy 27 through 30, and Psalm 1. And it goes like this. If you obey God, he's going to bless you. You're going to be wealthy. You're going to have lots of children. You're going to have a long life. But if you disobey God, you're going to be cursed. You're going to lose everything, your health, your family, everything. Now, the problem is, what happens when you look at life and the wicked prosper and the righteous die early? Well, this is what Job is about. This is what Psalm 73 is about. And really, this is what Ecclesiastes is about. It's getting people to think, what if? Is this all there is? Because, the promises of the Bible are so different from the reality that you and I face. I mean, it's just different. There's disease and war and terrible sin and rebellion and faithlessness. And you go, where is the God of the promises of the Bible? Well, these authors are struggling with that. And all of us struggle with that. I really think probably the number one reason why people don't become Christians is this ideal of evil and suffering in the world. They just say, if God is powerful and God is good, why don't he do something? And I think to put evil on the doorstep of God is to totally misunderstand, particularly Genesis 1 through 3. A book that has helped me, I think I've mentioned it to you, but if I hope you look at some of the books I mentioned, at least go to the library and get them if you're close to a bigger city. This is by a man named Wenham, Wenham, and it's called The Goodness of God. And he really deals with the evil and suffering in the world. So this is what this man is reacting to. And I think this is what under the sun means. And I think this is what vanity of vanity means. And I think this is what advantage or profit or lasting good means. And we struggle with that. We struggle with the mystery of life, and we can't control life. We can't understand it. We can't control it, but we believe there is a God. We believe he is merciful. We believe he does have a plan, and we believe he's with us. Now, all of those are faith presuppositions in light of the terrible situations that come in every family at some point. Okay, with that in mind, I hope you have the notes from chapter 6, and I want to look at that for a minute with you. I want to do the contextual insights first, just a couple of comments I want to make. It looks to me like it's possible, because of the recurrent use of some Hebrew words, to say that chapter 6, 1 through chapter 8, verse 15 may be a literary unit. And I say that because it looks rather disjointed, but there seems to be recurrent themes, particularly lexical themes. And this is just a presupposition, but you can see that if you look at the notes, there are several of these translations that think that that's true. Now, and number B, chapter 6 begins with the folly of, and there's a list of the things. Now, I think these are hyperboles, and I mean that they were overstating things. And what are we going to overstate? The value of riches, the value of many children, and the value of a long life. That's this, just real quick, this long life. And we think living long's a good thing. But that's not always true. All of us have been to the nursing home. We know that the longevity without quality of life is not a blessing. Well, the problem is that the author of Ecclesiastes is going to say, I wish I was a miscarriage. If the end of life is nothing more than death, both for animals and human, then a miscarriage gets over the misery quick. Now, see, that's the kind of thinking that so shocks us because we put so much value in our time spent on this planet, and we don't recognize the underlying presuppositions if there is no God. There's no hope. We're just a chain moving to a different kind of species in the future. And in a galaxy like ours, this is a violent galaxy, and nothing's going to last. Our sun's not going to last. So if there's no God, it's just utter hopelessness about this planet and life on this planet. So this is what this author is trying to shake us to think. And it's painful. It's really painful. Now, the reason for this folly, this trusting in the wrong things, is the never-ending cycle of human experience. Now, we talked about that earlier. Somebody says, I've come up with something new. And the author of Ecclesiastes would say, the only reason you think it's new is because the person who experienced it hundreds of years early has already been forgotten, and you just think it's new. And that's the recurrent theme here. The second is the fact that fallen humanity is never satisfied with this physical things. My illustration is not good, but it's the best that came to me. How many times do you ride the roller coaster and it's still fun? But see, after you ride it and it's really fun, then you got to get a bigger roller coaster, a faster roller coaster. Well, the problem is there comes a point where there is no bigger and faster. So pleasure seems to give joy for the moment, but it doesn't last. And that's what this is talking about. People think if I have riches, if I have children, if I have health, if I have longevity, if I have position, if I have power, I'll be happy. Why do you think we chose Solomon in chapters 1 and 2 as a literary foil to say you can have all those things and still end pretty badly? I want to remind you of Solomon's end. When he was an old man, his young wives caused him to enter into idolatry. I wonder sometimes if Solomon is right with God. I mean, he became an idolater in his old age. And it seems like to me from Hebrews 11 that it's faithfulness throughout life that's crucial, not faithfulness at the beginning. Shocking to think through that, but it's still Solomon is the literary foil. And there's a couple of places I'm going to deal with tonight where I think that kind of reference to Solomon is being brought back up. But before I leave that, I want to remind you tonight is the text where they're griping about government officials, that the government doesn't help, that there's need, that there's corruption, that there's bribery. Friends, if Solomon is the one writing this, he is the one that's appointing all these government officials. He could stop this in an instant. This is another hint that Solomon is a literary foil and not the author. And I remember the Jews in the book of the Talmud, Baba Bathra 15a, I forgot if it's A or B, said when Solomon was young, he wrote Song of Songs. When he was middle-aged, he wrote Proverbs. And he was old and gripey, he wrote Ecclesiastes. Now, see, that's clever. It's just not true. It's not true at all. Okay, let's go to chapter 6, verse 1. Now, notice if you look at the different quotes there, I've given a whole list of the English translations. You can see the vast majority of both modern, Jewish, and ancient call this an evil. But now the New Jerusalem Bible, the NIV, are a dynamic equivalent, and they're calling it another evil. Now, this word has been used before. It's used often. Matter of fact, it's going to be used in 6:1, 6:2. But it was used earlier, and you might want to see the note in chapter 2, verse 21, and chapter 5, verse 13. We're talking about evil in human society. Now, notice the next little phrase is, again, it's a problem. How do we understand this word? Now, under the sun, we've talked about, I think it's the general view. This is what life would be if there is no God. The full note is back in chapter 1, verse 3. This third item here, does this mean one of two things? Evil is common to all human beings. Do you see the Peshitta there, the ancient Syriac translation? Or two, evil weighs heavily on all human beings. Now, MT means the Masoretic Hebrew text. So you can see the wide semantical feel of this word and how both ancient and modern interpreters understood it differently. And both of those are true. Whichever one is being specific in the author's mind, I don't think we can tell. But both those are true. Evil is common and evil weighs heavily. We know there's something more, but we feel trapped by the things of this world. Now, notice if you would, I want to add a note here at chapter 6, verse 2. It's not in your notes, so let me just cover it for a minute. It's going to say a man in the text. Now, this is not the word Adam that was used back in 519. This is another Hebrew word for human being, ish. The man is ish, woman is isha. So it's a play. Usually there is a semantic overlap of these two words. Now, usually all words, even synonyms, have some semantic overlap, but some distinctiveness in their meaning. Now, in Ecclesiastes, it looks to me like Adam and Ish are synonymous. Now, that's not always true, but I think it's true in Ecclesiastes. And there are several places where it's used. You can see those in your parallel Bible. Now, the second item in verse 2, God has given. Now, this is a major theme. This book is emphasizing not only the presence and activity of God, not only the character of God, but the sovereignty of God. We've seen it over and over. And I want to remind you of, chapter 2, verses 24 through 26, chapter 3, verse 13, and chapter 5, verse 19. God is sovereign. Now, this is, if God is sovereign, how can the world be such a mess if God promises for obedience that all the blessings will come? How can it seem like all the curses are here for righteous people? Now, this is the tension between the Jewish two ways. This is what the book of Job is all about, what Psalm 73 is about. And verses like this are surely about that too. Now, notice riches, wealth, and honor. These are the things that human beings think, if I just had this, I would be happy. Now, I've mentioned a little quote out of a Jeremiah there. I want to read this. This verse has always got me. I sometimes sign my letters with this scripture text. In light of men thinking they can be happy with these things, listen to Jeremiah. Thus says the Lord, let not the wise man boast in his wisdom. Let not the mighty man boast in his might. Let not the rich man boast in his riches. But let him who boasts boast in this, that he understands and knows me, that I am the Lord who exercises covenant love, justice, righteousness on the earth, for I delight in these things, declares the Lord. Woo, what a wonderful text about the nature and character of God. Things of this world can be a blessing, but I've heard it said this way. I think it's a good saying. Augustine said, there's a God-shaped hole in every person. And we try to find happiness by filling in with riches, fame, drugs, power, sex, whatever we think will make us happy. But the truth is, until we find God, none of those other things have significance. Once we find God, all of those other wonderful physical, emotional, spiritual things give meaning and joy in the midst of a world like ours. So I think that's real powerful that we hear that. Now, the next little phrase, God has given, but God has not empowered. I want to read this real quickly. I think I said it well. Notice the active presence of God. In 519, this presence is a blessing, given, empowered. But here, the blessing of material possessions is not balanced with the wisdom to enjoy them. Things without inner peace do not bring happiness, contentment, satisfaction, or lasting benefit. Now, think what we're searching for, that which cannot fulfill. I think of that country western song, looking for love in all the wrong places. A modern man is looking for happiness, contentment, joy, and peace in all the wrong places. Now, in your notes, you'll know I've listed three things, really four things, that this book says we do need first. These are priority things that give a perspective on the physical. Number one, enjoy daily life, whatever it may bring. I've said it this way: smell the roses. Don't look down the road for one day I'm going to be happy. Are you happy today? Do you sit down with a loved one? Do you have a job that you enjoy? Are there friends and companions? Friends, enjoy today, because none of us know about tomorrow. None of us control tomorrow. So, number one, enjoy daily life, the simple things that God gives from the hand of God to everyone, rich and poor, wealthy, educated, uneducated, whatever, powerful, no power. Second, trust in eternal life whenever and wherever physical life ceases. We don't know when we're going to die. We don't know how we're going to die. We don't know where we're going to die, but I guarantee you we're going to die. But when you get this peace that God is with us and for us, it doesn't matter. He's made some promises about the future. If God is true to his word and this world is unfair, there has to be another world for him to set it right, or the Bible is a lie. Where is justice? Where is fairness? Well, it's not here. So this is another evidence there must be more after death. Number three, honor God. Maybe you could put fear God, respect God. There is a God. He cares about you. We must acknowledge him. Number four, obey him. I like Jesus' words. I think it's Luke 6:46. Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not the things I tell you to do? Well, I think that's what this guy is saying. Look, believe God, trust God, obey God, and it'll be all right. You may have a hard life. You may die tomorrow. You may be treated unfairly, but there is a God, and he will set it straight. You hear Job 38-41 in that. The next little thing, soul lacks nothing and all that desires. Now, the word soul, this is the Hebrew word nephesh. As you can see, I've done a special topic for you. This is for all air-breathing, eating, reproducing life on this planet. The same word is used for the cattle as is used for Adam. So this is life-breathing animals on this world. Whenever it's used of humans, it can be translated soul, and that's what it's done here. Now, notice it says to eat from. Humans work hard, but they do not enjoy the fruits of their labor. What this is going to say is you're going to work hard. You're going to fill your barns. You hear Jesus' words about the guy who built bigger and bigger barns. You've done all this work, but you're not going to enjoy it. Somebody else is going to enjoy it. And the word foreigner here, I think, is talking about an invasion of the promised land, where everything these guys worked for and trusted in is suddenly gone to another power, another person. And boy, what terrible. This next little phrase, sore affliction, evil affliction, what are we talking about here? Life is unfair and unpredictable. Would you give me an amen on that? Yet God is actively present. What are we talking about here? The seeming prosperity of the wicked, so common in a world like ours, it is bothering people. Lasting happiness and contentment sought after so diligently by godless humans will not bring lasting peace. This is going to talk about that. Now, verses 3-6, specific examples. Now, this is going against traditional wisdom literature. And what we're saying is traditional wisdom literature said, if you have this, and this, you're going to be happy and blessed. And this author says, wait a minute. I know people who have that, but they've got it in the wrong way. They got it cheating, lying, and bribing people. I know people who have that, and they're miserable. So he's trying to say the things you think will make you happy, if you don't know God, in the end will not bring that. Now, what are some of these things? I've tried to list them here, and the rest of the context of this chapter talks about them. Many children. Now, this is both talking about sexual pleasures. Remember chapter 1 and 2, and descendants. Number 2, a long life, health, and many experiences in this world. He will find no satisfaction, no lasting advantage. Now, the full note on that is in chapter 1, verse 3. No profit, no lasting advantage, no good, which means it's here, it's gone, it doesn't satisfy. We're looking for what satisfies through life and into the next life. Okay? This life has been empty, vain, and meaningless. Chapter 1, verse 2. Almost as an aside, which it kind of puts it in, doesn't quite fit the list, and he just kind of makes it as an offhand comment, is that there's no proper burial. Now, for Jews, this burial was very important. They wanted a big burial. Matter of fact, in the New Testament, they hired mourners to make sure there was wailing at the funeral. Unburied was a horrible curse. We talked about the curse in Deuteronomy 21:23 about cursed is everybody who hangs on a tree, and that meant improper burial, being your body put on a spike is what that meant originally. So to the Jews, a proper burial was everything. Well, he's going to take that and develop it and say, you got a big funeral, got lots of people. Here's a righteous man who has no funeral, no praise. Where is the lasting advantage? Is it in the rich guy, or is it in the one who trusts God and fears God? This is the kind of thing we have to think about. Okay, verse 3, 100 children. Now, I think this is hyperbolic. It could be the idea of some rich person having several wives, but even 100 children gets way beyond, I think. Could it be the ideal, going back to Solomon, of a huge royal harem and having so many descendants? I'm not sure, but I think it's a hyperbole, to tell you the truth. And lives many years. Here again, the older I get, the more parts of my body quit working. I mean, how much joy is there in that? Long life without quality of life is not a blessing at all. And does not have a proper burial. Now, this again is going back to that idea about a good funeral is supposed to be something you look forward to. Now, notice where it says, better the miscarriage than he. Now, first of all, this word better, we've used that word over and over. It's a way of qualifying something that lasts, something that has advantage. Now, how could we ever say a miscarriage is better? Well, here again, if you think that all of life is meaningless and that both men and animals die, how do you know the spirit of one goes up and the spirit of the other goes down? If this is a pointless existence of pain and misery and misunderstanding, better to get it over with quickly. There's the blessing on the miscarriage. Now, see, it just bogs our mind. He's really pushing here about the futility and vanity of human life if there is no God. Now, I've mentioned here, if you can see in the note, the term miscarriage can mean abortive birth, or it can mean untimely, meaning an early or a late birth. It kind of depends on the context here. Look at verse 4 and 5. This refers to ultimately the birth of, chapter 6, verse 3. Birth what? Its birth is in vain. It goes into obscurity. Its name is covered. It never sees the light. It never has wisdom. It is better off. This is the miscarriage he's talking about. Better to have never seen the light, which is the Hebrew idiom for life. The baby comes out of the womb, sees the light of day. It's an idiom for life. And what he's saying is, if it's true, there is nothing more to this world than what's here and now. Better off the one who goes quickly. Oh, it's shocking to us. I know it's shocking. Notice then verse 5, where it says, it is better. Now, what is better? It's the miscarriage. The better is its comparison. Now, 1,000 years in verse 6, this is the Hebrew word eleph. It has a wide semantic field. It can be used literally, symbolically. I have done a special topic on 1,000. I hope you will look at that, because when we come to comparing the numbers of the armies and the tribes between Kings and Chronicles, there is a discrepancy in the numbers. I really think, and of course the Exodus too, how many came out of the Exodus? I think this word eleph really refers to a family unit or a fighting unit and not a literal 1,000. Now, this same thing is true in the New Testament when we get some of the Roman terms, military terms, centurion, legion. They never had the full complement. But a legion meant 6,000, a centurion meant 100, but they were always less than that. So I think 1,000 is, we should not be adding these numbers up and saying that, drawing a line saying that's how many there were. I hope you'll look at the special topic Eleph if I've whet your appetite about that. Do not all go to one place. Now, this is the common, this is Ecclesiastes. Go back to chapter 2, verse 14. Everybody dies. The wise man dies. The stupid man dies. The rich man dies. The poor man dies. Everybody's going to a terminal point. And human wisdom cannot tell you when or why or where or what's beyond. This world, looking at experiences, watching how men deal with men, you can't answer those questions. That's the shocker that goes with this. Now, the next paragraph, I hope you'll look at 7 through 9. I'm not sure if this is poetry or prose. You never know in this kind of book. I've made 3 statements here I want to look at just for a minute, because you read this, you go, oh my goodness, what is this talking about? I hope you'll read it real quick. You see it right before you. Number 1, all animals toil just to eat, yet they can never eat enough to give them lasting satisfaction. They get hungry again, right? Number 2, both the wise and foolish are caught up in the trials and problems of a fallen world. The second line is uncertain. It seems to give an advantage, i.e. street smarts, to a poor man who has to perpetually cope with less. Now, that's just an assumption on my part. I don't think the text is clear on that. Number 3, all humans want more than they have, yet when they have much, that's still not enough. Chapters 1 and 2. So that's the issue here. Now, when it says the word advantage in verse 8, this is that key verse. It's this recurrent theme. I hope you'll look at the detailed note in chapter 1, verse 3. This is the issue of the book. What advantage or lasting profit is there in this? And then he lists all the things in the physical realm, and none of them have an answer. Now, the next strophe, verse 10, we have the word named. Now, we look at this, we read this, and we say, what is this talking about? Well, I have 3 options. If you look at your notes, you see just 2, but I really am going to make number 3 that however. So I think there are 3 options on what does this word named mean. Number 1, this is Adam naming the animals. Number 2, this is man being named Adam. Adam out of Adamah, red clay. Number 3, I think fits much better. Look at my notes, please. However, in this context, it is not the naming of Adam or Adam naming the animals that is the focus, but the repetitive cycle of humans naming things. Now, I live in East Texas. There was a lot of Indians here. I live close to a place called Caddo Lake. That's the name of an Indian group. Do you think the Indians called the geographical and topological areas of East Texas by the same name that modern Americans do? Do you think the Spanish conquistadors that came to this area called these places by the same name? Names change all the time. Sometimes you forget the person and rename it. Sometimes there are many names. So the trick is naming means nothing. We had this building at the university that I taught at. It was given by a family, and they were very proud. They had this building to keep their namesake. The termites ate it to the ground. And now another building is sitting on top of it by a different name. Naming things means nothing. I get tickled. I drive down the highway, and this 10 miles is named after somebody. The next 10 miles is named after somebody. If the earth lasts 50 years, do you think those highways will still have that name to people that nobody knows? No, they won't. Okay. For he cannot dispute with him who is stronger than he. Now, this is real important here, and I'm giving you 2 opinions, and I'll give you mine. Some say this is talking about having to live with people who are more powerful over us, like bosses or taskmasters or powerful neighbors or local government officials. And that's possible. My theology says, and because of what follows, that we're talking about God here. How can you argue with God? He is the stronger person. So you can see in the notes, I've tried to show you that. Now, in verse 11 and 12, I want to read my little note here. human disputation, either with God or another, cannot solve the problem of meaningless life without hope. So here's my little note. The famous question of Ecclesiastes is, what then is the advantage to man? This is repeated. Look at the number of times: 1:3, 2:11, 2:22, 3:9, 5:16. Without a God of justice and mercy, there is no joy, benefit, or lasting satisfaction. Life can be good or hard, but what is beyond? Is there a qualitative difference between the fate of a person of faith versus a self-seeking, wicked person? Is there any difference at all? Human life is fleeting, like a shadow. Human life is laboriously labor. What does the future hold? This is the question. Is there a fair, just, merciful, unchanging God whose promises can be depended on? This is the faith issue of human existence. I remember that Helen Redding song, "Is this all there is to?" And she would list things that humans go through in the different cycles of their lives. Ecclesiastes, this ancient author, is doing the basic thing. He's looking at life and is saying, is this all there is? Is the experience that I have all there is? Well, then it's pitiful. There's no advantage. There's no meaning. There's no difference between the animal and the human. Woo, woo, woo. It's hard to think through these things, but verse 11, many words which increase futility. Now, there's a Hebrew word play between the word many and the word increase. Now, these kind of sound word plays occur often in poetry and wisdom literature. You can't pick it up in English, but they're there. Israel's wisdom literature would say there's wisdom in speaking less. Now, think about that. There's wisdom in speaking less. Now, this is another emphasis to that. Now, notice where it says, verse 12, like a shadow. Now, shadow can be used in several different ways. I've said it over and over. Context determines meaning, not a lexicon or dictionary. Sometimes shadow can mean the transitoriness of human life. We're here and the cloud moves and the shadow moves. Sometimes the word shadow can be used as the protecting care of God, like under the shadow of his wings, the Shekinah cloud that made a cloud of clouds over the tabernacle and the people during the wilderness wandering. It's like an air conditioner. There's 60 degrees difference between the shade and full sun in the desert. So there's two different ways of looking at the idea of shade or shadow. I've done a special topic on that. If you're interested, I hope you will look. Now, in verse 12, we ask, who is the who? There are two questions introduced with who. Now, we're going to deal with some of those questions when we get to chapter 7, okay? So let's turn to the notes on chapter 7 for a minute, and I want to pick up just briefly and look at these different translations. Now, let's look at the far to the left. The New American Standard has wisdom and folly contrasted. The New King James has the value of practical wisdom. The new RSV has various comments. Do you see how these very educated men and these translation committees cannot see a unifying structure in Ecclesiastes? And sometimes you got to just say it's different subjects strung together. Now, I have said to you that I think chapter 6 through chapter 8 may be a literary unit because of the reoccurrence of certain words, but that's just presupposition on my part. This book is more like a man's daily journal than it is an official doctrinal dissertation. This guy is recording his feelings every day, and he's putting them down in somewhat of an unstructured order. I know that bothers us, but that seems to be what it is. Now, if we go to contextual insights just for a minute, I want to look at number B. This is what I've been saying to you about the two ways. This book seems to be really taking on this Jewish traditional wisdom, as does the book of Job, as does Psalm 73. Now, number C, there's a number of commands. I'm not going to go all through there. I think there are 17 of them in this small section of Scripture. This is both admonitions, what to do, and warnings, what not to do. So there's a series of these. Now, the worst thing you could do is to say, I like number 6, but I don't like number 11. You cannot proof text this book. This book hangs together as a whole because the cult groups have proof text this book and they say something like this. You believe the Bible? Turn to Ecclesiastes, read that verse. What does it say? Now, see, if you interpret the Bible that way, you can almost be manipulated by these false teachers that are so prominent in God's name, then and now. Okay, let's look at verses 1 through 17. I made a note there for you. I want to mention about the Jewish Study Bible in verses 1 through 10. Go down a bit more, Charlie, right there. I do like to look at the Jewish Study Bible. I got this because I wanted to see the Jewish Publication Society of America's translation, their latest translation by Jewish Hebrew scholars of the Old Testament text. It's important for me to see how they look at modern lexical options with all the archaeological finds. I like this book. It's helpful. Now, here's their comment on this section. The chapter begins with a section of Proverbs, the longest part of which is in chapter 4, verse 3, chapter 6, verses 3 and 4. It is arranged in a series of better than comparisons concerning wisdom and folly. Wisdom, here in line chapter 4, verse 2, is what categorizes that the only certain thing in this life is its end. Death, fools, on the contrary, focus on this life, its illusionary pleasures of laughter and feasting. Now, what they're trying to say is take the big picture. Don't look at just one chapter. See what the overall book is about, and then try to find out where it fits. Notice verse 1. A good name is better than. This is going to be the contrast. Now, the word good is really related to the word better. Where is lasting good? What is better? These are the questions that this man is asking. The word good, often translated better, that links chapters 6 and 7 together. Let's see. The interpretive question is, where is the good found? Now, a good name is referring to a person who trusts God, obeys God throughout life. This is not foxhole religion. This is not revival religion. This is Hebrews chapter 11 religion. Looks back over a life of faith. That's what this good name is about. Now, good ointment, we're comparing the name with ointment. So we say to ourselves, what is the comparison? What can this mean? So these are just guesses on my part. Number one, outward appearance. Today's English version has expensive perfume. Number two, the need for healing and restoration. Number three, a time of festival. Now, I must admit, I'm not sure I know which one of those to pick, or if I should pick one of those at all. The day of one's death is better. Oh man, is that painful? Well, that's just what this whole thing is talking about. Now, notice in verse 2, we got a house of mourning and a house of feasting. The house of mourning seems to be life. Life is empty. Life is vain. Life is hard. Well, what would be maybe a funeral? Maybe someone sick that you're having to take care of. Well, what is the house of feasting? Well, that's the cultural days of joy, the birth of a child, a wedding feast for a week, the things that good that happen to the community. We're contrasting the activities of life by the idiom of the house of. This is the word Bethlehem, Bethlehem. These are all Beth is the idea of house of, used as an idiom for a certain characteristic group. Okay, because that is the end of every man. Well, what is the end? Well, there's a house of joy and a house of sorrow. You're born and you die. That's what we're talking about here. The living takes it to heart. Now, what does that mean there? Here's the options as I see it. Only the living can understand and have wisdom, not the dead. There's one possibility. Number two, the living should reflect on the reality of their own eventual mortality. Number three, the wise one thinks about these things, what? The future things, the important things, similar to let him who has an ear hear of the New Testament. So the wise man takes the long look, the foolish man takes the immediate pleasure look. And that we understand that. We've seen that. Now, in let's see here. In verse 3, sorrow is better than laughter. My goodness, what are we talking about here? Sorrow is better than laughter. Would you agree with me that you learn more about God's in time of stress than times of abundance? The times of abundance for human people often pull our hearts away from the Lord, but times of pressure and stress and confusion draw us near to him. A good quote from the book of Hebrews, chapter 5, verse 8, Jesus was perfected by the things that he suffered. I often think of the series in Romans 5, 3, and 4 of the things that the humans would say are negative, but Paul says are positive because they lead to steps of more and more spiritual growth. So suffering does have a purpose in growth. So in a book that's saying laughter is the person who lives for the immediate, but there is the one who lives for the future and trust in God, I think that's the contrast here. Okay, now this, I'm going to read my thing because this is tough. I'm not sure I have any idea what this is talking about. The next little, on verse 3. Now, my New American Standard says, for when a face is sad, a heart may be happy. Now, when a face is sad, a heart may be happy. Well, is this someone who faces trials and problems, but they have an inner peace about God and about who he is all the time they're having to walk through sorrow? I think that's a real possibility. Let me read what I wrote years ago in this subject. In context, Coley is saying that life difficulties have the potential to awaken a spiritual dimension. This is the focus of Deuteronomy 27 and 28, as well as the plagues of Egypt that caused some Egyptians to believe in Yahweh. Similarly, the seals and trumpet judgments of the book of the Revelation are given so that men will turn back to God. Now, number 2, contrasting the feelings of the immediate daily life with the world view of eternity. This life makes us sad. All of us have problems in this world, but if we have faith and obedience, even these sad times give us hope, peace, and strength. The author is not condemning happiness, just the opposite. He is advocating an appropriate peace and contentment that is not based on temporal circumstances alone. A book that has been so helpful to me, I've given you the title there, is by a Quaker lady in the 1800s called Hannah Whitall Smith. And her book is The Christian Secret of a Happy Life. It has been so encouraging to me. One of the phrases she has that I like so much, it says that faith does not know that it has wings until it's knocked off its feet. Now, think about that. Sometimes we go through things, we say certain things about God and about our belief, but where the rubber meets the road, all of us can say Jesus loves me when things are going good, but when it gets tough, you can really tell who really trusts him and who don't. I mean, it's just obvious. Life brings reality. Easy sentences, easy phrases hit the wall with the reality of an unfair life. And all of us experience that. Now, notice that it mentions, let's see. Have you noticed as you read through this that verses 4 and 5, in a sense, parallel verses 2 and 3? I'm going to let you check that out. I'm not going to try to explain that detail. Number 5, the rebuke of a wise man. Now, here we're going to contrast two things. A wise man will listen to a rebuke from God, a rebuke from a spiritual person. They will recognize a problem. They will try to fix it. They will repent of it. A rebuke can have real results when given in love and from a godly perspective. Now, the other side is the fool refuses to take rebuke. He just wants to live for the moment. He doesn't want the long view. So rebuke for him is just something to blow off as, I don't want to hear it, have no effect. Now, that's what I think this is talking about. Now, the song of fools would be a pleasure-oriented life, an idiom for that. Now, verse 6 mentions the crackling of thorns. Now, this is where you got to go to one of these books that tells you about the historical setting of the day and the time. The one I like is James Freeman's The Customs and Manners of the Bible, which is indexed by topic and text. Thorn bushes, though prevalent in the semi-desert place of the ancient Near East, was very poor fuel for cooking. It burned too fast, and it didn't cook long enough. So nobody used thorn bushes for cooking. So that's the idea here. They're ineffective. Now, the word laughter is imagery for the person who seeks instant gratification. We're not condemning laughter, but we're condemning the hope in laughter alone. We're not condemning pleasure. We're condemning the hope in pleasure alone. We're not condemning wealth. We're condemning wealth alone. I hope you understand what I'm saying there. In verse 7, now you notice I've listed several different possibilities for the semantical field. I want you to notice that the Jewish Publication Society changes in its footnote, changes the word to riches. Now, oppress is very similar in Hebrew, just one consonant different than the word riches. So is it oppression or is it riches we're talking about? Both would fit the context, and I'm not sure which one I think is best here. The word bribe, I want to read that my note there, please. That bribe was a terrible thing in the ancient world, as it is today. This is not the normal word for bribe. There's another word used over and over for bribing a judge. This is not it. This is the word for gift. Now, we've used that word so often about the gift of God. This is the word for gift, used in a specialized sense. Forms of this same root denote a gift from, are found in Ecclesiastes 3:13 and 5:19. It must be recognized that 7:7 does not fit into the context easily. The New King James and the New Jerusalem Bible see it as relating to verses 5 through 7. From Ecclesiastes 7:1, the text may have been referring to how wise men think about themselves. However, fallen humanity, because of oppression and bribery, can affect even the wise. Wisdom is reflected in how one lives, not in how one thinks. It's one thing to say something, it's quite another one to live something. We all speak beyond what we do. Now, in verse 8, notice it says, the patience of spirit is better. Here again, this is so ambiguous. I've just tried to do the best I can at sharing you the options. Then you got to pray about this, read the whole chapter, and see which one of these lexical connotations seems to fit best for you. Let me look at this with you. Verse 8, second line, contrasts two kinds of people by the repeated use of the word spirit. This is the word ruah, often translated breath, wind, or spirit. Now, you see, I've done a special topic there for you. It's imagery for the life of a person. Here are the two kinds of people contrasted. Number one, the patient, literally long. This is used in Proverbs for a person slow to anger. However, its most common usage is to describe God's merciful character, a patient, loving, long-suffering person. So we talk about a patient person. Or number two, haughtiness, literally high, used of a haughty spirit, ruah. Notice that other anthropomorphic uses of high. Now, anthropomorphic is simply the word for man, anthropos, and the word for form, morphe. So we're using things to talk about human spirits. Number one, a tree, used of a haughty person. Imagery of an arrogant mouth, one who speaks too much and speaks too much about themselves. A haughty heart, Proverbs 16. Haughty eyes. These are ways we describe people. People of faith are meant to emulate Yahweh. People of faith are encouraged to take the long look, not only the immediate, chapter 7, verse 10. The attitude with which people of faith face life is a powerful witness. I think that's true. Now, verse 9, do not be eager in your heart. Now, the word eager, this seems to be used adjusted, can be the word hasty. So don't do things hasty. Now, there are several kinds of people. Notice how I've characterized them. The impatient spirit, verse 8, the haughty spirit, verse 8, and the quick in spirit, the acts too quickly, verse 9. Now, anger here, God is said to be slow to anger, but human anger is often sparked not by mercy, but by wanting more and more for one person's self. It's self-interest. Now look at verse 10 with me for a minute and see the notes. I'm sorry I'm reading so much, but there's a lot here and I just couldn't keep this in my mind. Humans without a sense of God's presence and purpose in their daily lives often seek peace by reflecting on the positive circumstances from the past. We often say the good old days. However, they cannot be reclaimed. You can't get them back. They were not that good to begin with. Your mind's just forgotten all the bad parts about them. And they often reflect a fallen view of the word good. What were they good? Good for revelry? Good for spending too much? Good for neglecting things? No. God is in the mysterious process of molding his covenant partners into the people of God. This takes time, patience, and faith. Romans 5, 3 and 4. Focusing on human experience long since past causes one to stumble in the present. Now think about that. If you focus too much on the past and don't live in the present, you jeopardize the present. I think that's just an axiom. Now, verses 11 through 14. Notice the key terms in these few verses. The word good, the word advantage, under the sun, and this is the key words in Ecclesiastes. Notice here, good and advantage point toward more than just a happy life here and now. Happiness and contentment have two foci. Number one, now, wisdom and inheritance, both from previous generations. Two, afterlife, under the sun. However, they are tied together. Our afterlife is affected by our physical life now. The choices we make now affect our future and our eternity. Verse 12 explains chapter 7, verse 11, and relates it to this life, while 7, 13, and 14 relate to God's active presence in the temporal realm, but also the implication of his continuing presence and care. He is sovereign. He is with us. He is for us, even when circumstances seem to scream the opposite. If the believer's joy and peace are based on physical blessings, traditional Jewish wisdom, the two ways, they can be removed or changed in a moment. No, the eyes of faith take the long look and trust in God. I hope as a reader, you recognize that my understanding of under the sun permeates all of my interpretations of this book. It is a basic presupposition, bias, or a priori. Every commentator has these presuppositions, theological glasses, I call them. The first place to analyze an interpretation is the basic presuppositions of the interpreter. All of us have them. You do too. I just try to give you mine. Now, the word protection here, this is the word shadow. I've told you the word shadow or shade can be positive or negative. And that we're going right back to this idea here. It's either the brevity of something or the presence of God's personal care. Under the shadow of his wings kind of is the idiom we usually see. Wisdom preserves the lives of its possessors. Longevity is connected to, this is what I'm saying, a long life. And this seems like a contradiction. Earlier he said, better to be a miscarriage than have a long life. Now he's going to say, this is a life journal. This is not a thought through theological outline thing. Now he's going to say a long life is a good thing, and it's based on two things. Number one, the will of a sovereign God and the choices of human beings. Wow. What else you say about that? Verses 13 and 14. Now, this is a recurrent theme, even though we can't always understand why of our natural or individual circumstances. This ability to understand is purposeful. Excuse me, I missed that. Oh, the inability of us to understand is purposeful. I mean, God gave us the desire to know, but we can't know. Exactly. That's what he's been saying. The fall has affected our ability to grasp truth. Faith, not understanding, is crucial in life and death. When I look at the book of Job, at the end, Job didn't need an explanation of why. Job needed the peace and presence and faith in God. Faith is more important than understanding. Maybe one day we will understand. Maybe one day we'll see the truth without these live in a glass darkly 1 Corinthians 13 eyes. But right now, we cannot let circumstances rob us of the joy of the presence of the gift of daily life and the sense by faith that God is with us and for us. It's a choice we make, and it's a choice that affects how long we live. I think people with positive mental attitudes live longer. because they're not so stressed about the normal things that happen to human beings. Okay. I mentioned the word straighten in verse 13. This is used in two different senses. I've tried to show it there to you. It's used 3 times in Ecclesiastes. The first 2 times have to do with man can't straighten what's crooked. It's a play on God being straight. It's a root of the word righteousness. A man can't straighten what's bent. This one here is a little different. This seems to be used in the sense, the connotation of something arranged purposefully. And 12:9 would be a good parallel passage here. Okay, now let's go to verse 15. Again, this is such a crucial verse. I want to read my notes if you'll let me. Forgive me for reading so much, but I thought I didn't want to leave anything out. The opening phrase of this verse goes back to the literary foil, chapters 1 and 2 of Solomon. The author is claiming both extensive observational wisdom, yet he also recognizes its absolute folly and futility. Experience has caused him to become pessimistic about earthly life, but hopeful, though veiled, of God's activity both now and in the future. That's what the word advantage is really all about. The verse states the theological tension over the circumstances of the righteous versus the wicked. The traditional theology, the 2 ways, stated that God blessed the righteous and destroyed the wicked. However, this is not always the way it works out in life. Therefore, the book of Job, Psalm 73, and Ecclesiastes begin to question this traditional premise. This is not meant to depreciate obedience or covenantal faith, but to place it in the context of a fallen world. This is not the world that God intended it to be. A good Christian song at this point would be, "This is the day the Lord has made. I will rejoice and be glad in it." Circumstances or earthly things cannot affect true happiness. We've got to look at the whole. Okay, the word futility is the idea of vapor or breath or meaninglessness. We've talked about that. We've seen it over and over. Chapter 1, verse 2 is the major note on that. Verses 16 through 18. We are warned to be careful of 2 things: the extremes of legalism and antinomianism. Too many rules, no rules. Self-estimation of one's goodness. Now, it's going to be a little veiled when I show you this, but it looks like we're using a word that you're familiar with a different connotation. It's not that we should be careful of too much righteousness. We should be careful of thinking of ourselves as too righteous. Now, I think the Hebrew seems to reflect that, though the English translation doesn't always do that. Matter of fact, verse 16, notice what it's several unusual verbs, 4 of them. The last one denotes a self-deceiving spirit that trusts too much in its own efforts. That's what I think is going on here. Okay, verse 17. Why would you die before your time? Now, this gives me several things to think about. So let me give you a note that I have just added that's not in your notes. There are several natural events related to the different seasons, times of human life. The mind or actions of those who fear God can extend the days of one's life. Faith affects longevity. Yes, that's true. Now, that's about before your time. Do you mean that there are some human choices that can affect when someone dies? Well, we talked about that some human choices are involved in someone living a long time. We're talking about godly people here now. Some human choices, godly people, can result in an untimely death. You might want to say, here is a Christian young person who decides they want to go ride a bull, and they get in the ring and the bull throws them and gores them. Now, did God do that, or did that person make a dumb choice? We all make dumb choices, and sometimes the consequences are catastrophic. So human choice is involved in both, but ultimately God is sovereign. That's painful, but true. Verse 18. This is a summary statement going back to chapter 7, verse 15. From the context, Coley seems to encourage a righteous life and a prolonged life, both of which are related to an appropriate fear and respect for God. There is an evil in our world and in our hearts. God and his hidden will, his hidden goodness, his hidden presence are still with fallen mankind. They're our only hope. We cannot fully understand him or our circumstances, but we can trust him, obey him, and abide in faith amidst the unpredictability of earthly life. See, I don't like it. Well, none of us like it, but you know there's an element of truth there. You and I thank God for a New Testament where so much of these truths are updated and where we seem through prayer and through godliness to be able to deal with some of these circumstances. But I want to remind you, this is Old Testament, Mosaic covenant, performance-based wisdom literature. Thank God for progressive revelation. But we must interpret this in light of the original inspired author's intent. I don't have the right to bring all these New Testament passages into Ecclesiastes until I fully understood Ecclesiastes in its own day to the people who first heard it and read it. I must understand what it's saying then before I try to apply it, or before I let other parallel passages dominate, overcome, or change the intent of this original inspired author. I hope you understand that. The next little phrase, I just don't know what to do. You can see my notes. Sometimes I just try to crawdad here. Life is unpredictable. God's work and will are hidden. Wisdom cannot find ultimate answers. Do you feel the pain there? I hope you do. Verse 19. Now, these 10 rulers, this looks to me like we're talking about the abuse of government people, whether it's through bribery or through not good planning or through bad personalities. If Solomon was the author, he could fix this. He could change this. This is another evidence, I think, that Solomon's not the author. Wisdom is a strong ally in a fallen world, but it cannot shield believers from evil, pain, injustice, and bad circumstances. Can I get an amen, brothers and sisters? Wisdom is better. Faith is better. God is a shield. God is a fortress. But there are terrible things that happen to God's people. This is the tension of the Old Testament. He is with us and for us, but he apparently allows things to happen. Is there a purpose in it? Sometimes we can't find that purpose. And verse 20 is a reaffirmation of who never sins. There's no righteous people. Now, I put all those texts in there about where I think throughout the Bible the same thing is done. I like the summary in Romans 3:23, all that list beginning in chapter 3, verse 9 of all the quotes from the Old Testament about all of them had asp under their tongues. All of them are liars. Just think of Genesis. Everything was wicked before the flood. I mean, boy, human beings have fallen. Something has happened to us. Now, verse 21 and 22. The writer encouraged us not to take ourselves or the words of others too seriously. We often say what we do not really mean. Another possibility is that all humans are incapable of complete righteousness, all sin. Be careful of judging one another or reacting to insult, since you too insult people. Well, I'm so glad people can't read my mind, because I think things, I guess it's the way I process it, but I'd be so embarrassed if things that I thought were said. And we got to be careful. I've usually found that things we're so critical in others about are things that we're upset in ourselves about. We just don't have the perspective on judging and speaking such tacky things. Let's look at verses 23 through 25. I'm not sure if this is prose or if this is a stanza or a paragraph. We're talking about a woman here. Now, you know, there are several different ways that women are addressed in the Bible. The word wisdom is feminine. So in Proverbs 8, wisdom is a woman. She's the first creation of God, and all things are made through her. In Proverbs, there's a godly woman, a woman who calls to people in the street to come and get wisdom, put it as a necklace around your neck. But there's another woman that calls in the street. And this is the woman for instantaneous gratification. This is the woman who traps and catches young men This is the manipulative woman. One is the godly woman. One is the manipulative woman. But we're gonna talk about that some here. Wisdom is hard to find. She must be sought. I will be wise. Again, human effort cannot solve the mysteries of this life. They're beyond our ability because we are not fully and adequately related to God as we were in Genesis 1 and 2. Verse 24. Notice the parallel concepts about the difficulty in fallen humanity. Now, women are singled out in Ecclesiastes 7:28. Oh, as I read that, I thought, my goodness, what am I going to do with chapter 7, verse 28? I certainly, if you know me, I have always advocated the place of women in leadership. I am so grateful for the women leaders and godly women in my life. But remember one or two things. We're either using Solomon, I'm thinking of 7:28 now. We're either using Solomon, who had so big of a harem, or we're talking about the patriarchal system of the ancient Near East. Now, that is the context that we're in. So a negative word about woman is not something that here's a universal principle stated in the Bible. No, 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 no. This is an aspect of A&E culture that I think the New Testament completely changes. But I want to mention that to you. Okay, verse 24. The search for wisdom. It's remote. It's exceedingly mysterious. Who can discover it? I am seeking, but I have not found. So here's a man who, remember chapters 1 and 2, he's going to do everything to pursue wisdom, and he found it all is vanity. This is a kind of a repeat of that. Now, the word discover is used 9 times in chapter 7. Think about that, 9 times. I've listed them for you here. You can, if you're interested in that, I think you can see what I'm talking about. Okay, let's go to, let's see. I think I want to drop down to 26 if I can, the woman. And I want to read this little note. I got this from the New International Dictionary of Old Testament Theology. I think it's volume 2, verse 887. Here's what it says. Attitudes toward death. At best, death was mysterious and fearful, emphatically deep, called sleep. Those who hate God are said to love death, but this, of course, is language of hyperbole. Usually the prospect of death conjures up feelings of terror, panic, bitterness. There is nothing of the New Testament ideal of death as release or relief. Something had even to be longed for. Now, friends, you've got to realize that the Old Testament is the Old Testament. And even when we talk about death, we're talking about death from the perspective of A&E, the 2 ways culture. So I hope you'll think about that. This verse has several images alluding to hunting animals, snares, nets, chains, escape, captured. And all of this has to do with seeking wisdom and the folly of imagery. A woman calling, come to instantaneous pleasure. And a woman calling, no, take wisdom as a garland around your neck. That's the temptations of man. Instantaneous or wisdom that leads to the advantage of permanent good and profit. It's the same tension. Now, 27 and 28. I think it's possibly an allusion back to Solomon when we talk about the 1,000, a man, 1,000 to 1, and women none. If you just want to take it at face value, wisdom is really, really rare. I mean, it's really, really rare in men. He says it's non-existent in women. Now, we know that's not true because there's wise women in the Old Testament. There at least 2 that I know of are called wise women. So this is just the philosopher spouting off. You got to do parallel passages here. Now, he said he's going to deal with an explanation in verse 29. Now, it looks like to me he's doing 2 truths from Genesis. Number 1, God created all things good, Genesis 1:31. Or fallen humans are very creative and energetic in the area of evil and rebellion. Though morally capable, humans turn from God's will to self-will at every opportunity. This is the lingering result of the fall. More and more for me at any cost. Boy, chapter 7. Woo, what a negative chapter. Let's go to chapter 8. I see the time. We're doing well, so thank you for staying with me. And sorry I'm having to read so much tonight. Please forgive me. Now, possibly chapter 8, verse 1 should close out chapter 7. There's a real possibility there. And if that's true, then verse 1 of chapter 8 concludes the discussion of chapter 7. And you can see if you think that's true. Now, the word illumines here, this is often used of God's face being bright. This is the only place in the Bible where it's used of a human face being lit up. So you say to yourself, what does it mean? A man's wisdom illumines him and causes his stern face to beam. Now, first of all, what's his stern face about? Well, I'm not sure. The word beam literally means change. So I've given you some options of this verse. Number 1, wisdom gives peace and contentment. We could say amen to that. Wisdom helps courtiers, royal helpers, keep their true feelings to themselves. Don't reveal to the king how you really feel. Number 3, wisdom helps royal helpers keep the king's confidence. Don't go telling what the king said to your family, your wife, or neighbors. So that's a possibility. Now, the term illumines and beams seem at first to be parallel, but on closer reading, I think they refer to two different people, a court sage and a monarch. Now, you've got to see if you buy that. Illumines him and having a stern face. So I think the illumines is the king, and the stern face, don't have a stern face if you're a servant of the king. That's what I think it's saying. Now, in 2 and 3, these are two verses have a series of commands. Here are the commands. Keep the command of the king. Do not be in a hurry to leave. We'll talk about that. And do not join in an evil matter. Now, exactly what does it mean to keep the commands of a king? I think, again, it's hard to know because it looks like we just talked about the face of a monarch and a servant. But again, I think we're talking about the ideal of God as king. So be capital J. And the reason I think that, and look at my notes if you would, is either reference to God. That's what the Targums, the Aramaic Targums, the translation and commentary on the Hebrew text, are an earthly monarch. It seems to me the real subject of Ecclesiastes 8, 2 through 8 is God, not just an earthly king. Because, now here's my list, if you buy it. The sovereignty of the king, verses 3 and 4. There is a proper time. Remember first chapter 3, that's a sovereignty of God text, 5 and 6. Humans have trouble, verse 6. There is a mystery in human affairs, verse 7, only God knows. God's authority is emphasized in verse 8. Humans do not, should not have it. And number 6, he will do whatever he pleases is always used of God as a phrase in the Bible. And finally, the vast majorities of the use of command refer to God. So you can see what I think we're talking about how a person approaches God. So this would be more of a worship setting than simply a monarchical setting. But I think both are really possible. Notice down, an oath before God. Now, this is one of two things. We're talking about an oath to God. God is the king. Or we're talking about a person makes a vow or a pledge or a pledge of allegiance to the king in God's name. Now, either are possible here. To leave him. Now, the word leave him can have several possibilities. It could be rebellion. That's how it's used in Akkadian and Ugaritic. A rebellion against God, or leaving the king's service, meaning not working at the palace anymore. I'm not sure which is which. I've added a little note on the word hurry. It's not in your notes, so let me read it. It'll be in the future notes online, but it's not there yet. Verse 3, in a hurry. The word hurry is literally dismayed or disturbed. It's a jussive form here. It's imperfect, but it's jussive in meaning. This root is often linked to another Hebrew root, hurry. So disturbed and hurry are very similar roots, and they're often linked together, which often has a negative connotation. Even here, it has a negative sense. And I've listed several places where it's used like that. It is simply to denote in a hurry or rapid action. Remember, context determines meaning and the connotation of the words in the semantic field. So It looks to me like if the king's talking, we're talking about a monarch here, you don't go, well, I hope you hurry up, look at your watch, impatient to go do. And if you're talking to God, talk to God. Don't rush off. Wait a while. I think that's what it's talking about. I've mentioned to you that evil matter has a wide semantic field. If you look at the notes, I've tried to show you all the places in Job and Ecclesiastes how this one Hebrew root, I'm getting that from a certain Hebrew lexicon. Notice how many different ways it's translated. Well, we call this the semantic field. These are the ways this word can be understood. So this is another good example where context determines meaning, not simply etymology. And you can see how these are related but different. And I think that's a good point for us to always remember. Now, in verse 5, mine says royal command, but you notice the word royal is in italics, which means that it's not in the Hebrew text. So it could be a command from God. Verse 6, at the proper time, that's what chapter 3 is all about. And it was talking about God. And notice the word procedure in verse 6 means judgment. When a man's trouble is heavy upon him. Now, the Septuagint changes the word trouble to the word knowledge. And again, this would be the problem of much wisdom, there's much grief. Life is hard and unpredictable, even for the wise, God-fearing person. Wisdom does not promise that we understand. Now, verse 7, I'm going to read this, please forgive me. The mystery of human life, humans do not know when, why, or how problems or joys come, is the recurrent theme of Ecclesiastes. Human wisdom cannot find the answer to the mystery. So here's the conclusion. Enjoy life when and where you can. You don't have the promise of tomorrow. You cannot change the past. Enjoy today. Thank him for today. Trust in God. Though the circumstances look terrible, the Bible says there is a God. He does care. He's going to set it straight one day. Number 3, obey God. If you know he told you to do something, if you know his word says something, do it. Don't make excuses. Don't put it off. Do it. I think that's helpful. This is all we can do. Now, this is an Old Testament perspective. See Ecclesiastes 6:12. Thank God there is a new covenant. Thank God for progressive revelation. Oh, this is so Old Testament, and there's more. Let's see. Look at verse 9 with me. Under the sun, again, is that key verse. A man has exercised authority over another man to his hurt. Now, this is a general summation of the human situation. The dominance given to man over this planet in Genesis 1:28 has been abused terribly. It's been abused on how we treat this planet for our own greed and our own resources and our own pleasure. And it's certainly true on how we treat each other for more power and wealth for ourselves. So I think you can see what we're talking about. This context here seems to be talking about governmental oppression. And I think that's true of chapter 4:1, chapter 5:8, chapter 7:7, and chapter 8:9. And this is why I think Solomon is not a good choice for the author of this whole book. He certainly is literary foil. Now, beginning in verse 10, this verse has many textual problems. And I don't know quite what to do with you here. I could read through this, but I'm not sure that's what I need to do. Here's the issue. Is there one person being talked about here, or is there two persons being talked about here? It looks to me like there are two. There are things that happen to the wicked, and there are things that happen to the righteous. And we're contrasting those. And a lot of it has to do with some real technical Hebrew, very similar spellings. It has to do with some word plays. I don't think anybody can solve this. So you can read my note if you're interested in textual issues. But this is where I look at several different English translations and see if you can figure out from your reading of the whole chapter what this is talking about. Okay? All right, let me look at verse 12 if I could. May lengthen his life. We've talked about somebody prolonging life by their choices. If you're wicked and you choose revelry, you're going to choose to have a shorter life. Your liver may give up. Your kidneys may give up. If you're godly and you follow God and you live these godly principles, you may live longer. That's what we're talking about again. may lengthen his life. This is and was the problem of evil in a fallen world. Evil is its own environment. It flourishes here. It seems to prevail over the good. Evil persons may live longer, but they will face God one day. Read Psalm 73. Boy, David struggled with this, and he said, it finally came to me. They may be laughing now, but they won't be laughing for always. It is the seeming unfairness in God's world and in traditional wisdom literature, the two ways, that bothered Job, the author of Psalm 73, Coleth, and Habakkuk. Where is the God of promise and justice? Now, again, the book that's helped me a whole lot is by Wenham, called The Goodness of God. I hope if you're interested in this subject. I still know will be well for those who fear God. This is a faith statement. In the midst of all the lack of understanding, in the midst of all the wisdom, this man's faith comes through. Fear God, respect God, all God. You can't see him. He's here. You don't know why these things happen, to the bad, to the good, why it happened to you. No way you can figure it out, but there is a God, and he is for us, and he is with us, and he is going to set it straight. Let's see. Okay, let's go to 15. I think 8:15 is a recurrent theological theme over and over and over. Trust God, enjoy the moment. This is the conclusion based on the failure of wisdom to understand or affect the unfairness and injustice of this seemingly random earthly life. Why do things happen? Why me? Why this? Why now? That's what we cannot understand. You say, well, it should be that the righteous don't have it and the wicked do have it. But you look at life and it looks exactly opposite. Where is God? It just doesn't seem right. This is what the author is struggling with. But the overarching principle of covenant faith says, I don't understand. I can't understand. I'll never understand, but I believe God is with me and for me. Now, I think it's just a faith stance about facing life. Okay, let's go to 16 and 17, and I will close with this and let you have time to ask me questions or make comments. And I hope there are some comments. This is either, number one, a summary statement which parallels chapters 1 and 2, or the introduction of a new section. This new section, I get that from the Handbook for Translators, this a reference source from United Bible Societies I've mentioned so often. Number one, wisdom is laborious. It's a grievous task, even though one should never sleep night or day. If you work night and day, you still wouldn't be wise. You hear chapters 1 and 2. Coleth gave himself to wisdom, back in chapter 1, verses 13 and 14. Human wisdom cannot discover God's purpose. How many times have we said that? Ecclesiastes 3:11, 7:23, and Job 38 through 41 is exactly the same truth. This is why 8:15 and later 12, 13, and 14 are advocated. So I know you probably have never gone through Ecclesiastes verse by verse. Nobody wants to do this because it seems so negative. Holy moly. But you gotta see the overall purpose. We're trying to slap fallen man and say, look, you think you got it all together. You think you got it figured out. You know nothing, dude. You control nothing. You don't have any clue what's going to happen to you tomorrow. But there is a faith perspective that says circumstances cannot pull my heart away from the one who loves me and created me, and from the New Testament died for me. So this is a negative book for a positive purpose. Okay, thank you all for listening to my ranting and raving, and thanks. Thank you for letting me read through this tonight. Some of it was just difficult to try to summarize. I would love to talk to you, and thank you so much for tuning in, and I'd be happy to share with you what I think, and it'll surely show what I don't know.
We don't have any questions in the chat, Brother Bob, so if anyone would like to open their mic and ask a verbal question, that would be fine.
I do have a question, Dr. Bob.
Okay.
You mentioned reading this book without our New Testament perspective. And how would you do that with all the Old Testament? Like, how do you remove? I know so much of the New Testament. How do I remove that?
I think what you have to do, we call this the difference between biblical theology and systematic theology. Now, biblical theology is trying to take a slice of scripture and understand as best we can what it is saying in its own day. And then systematic theology is going to take that same truth and show you how it's progressive revelation, how it's parallel in the New Testament, or how it is changed in the New Testament. So we cannot speak New Testament truth into these texts until we have fully understood these texts. Now, once we do, then I think for sure we must bring in the New Testament perspective. But in this study, I have tried to limit myself to the Old Testament, this performance-based covenant of Moses. And I think we have to be fair to this inspired author before we let other inspired authors change, crush, or mediate what he's trying to say. Because he's inspired too, right? He has as much right to tell us what he wants to with power as we have to say, wait a minute, Jesus said. Well, thank God Jesus is going to deal with some of this. But I've got to say, what is Coley trying to do to the people of his day? And really, this book is going to be a more powerful witness to intellectuals and materialists and naturalists than any New Testament book at first. G. Campbell Morgan said this book is what caused him to fear God. This book has a hammer that the New Testament does not use. And so I think it's really good that we let people say, if there is no God, we are miserable creatures. And until you come to that, and that's what atheistic humanism has come to. There's no purpose in life. There's no memory of me. There's no reason for me being here. See, that's the reality of secularism. So this book is going to say, oh, really? Then let's think about that.
Eat, drink, and be merry.
So it opens them up to the gospel. The gospel is a wonderful new message, but this one may be the crack in the rock that the Spirit hits to split that rock.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, I'm emotionally tired going through this, and I'm glad you don't have any questions. So next week, we're going to be doing now the next, I think we're doing, let's see, 9 and 10. For sure, 9 and 10. And one of these next 2 weeks, I got to do 3. So I may get in part of 11, but I doubt it. So 9 and 10 for next week, and then 11 and 12 for the week after that. And we'll zip up this very pessimistic, but very powerful book. Well, let's